Welcome, everybody, to ASCP's podcast, Our Experience. My name's Chad. Alongside me is my tag team partner, Tom. And we are going to talk about another pillar of industry today. And that pillar of industry is Al Carter. And to kick it off, give some description, there's a famous quote from Top Gun, actually the original, that the rules exist for your safety and that of your crew. Al Carter is the leader of the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. His job is sifting through 50 ways to do anything. It's methodical, it's detail-oriented work, and finding consistency and pushing for continuity is even worse. So welcome, Al, to the show.
Thank you, Chad and Tom. Great to be here.
So to kick it off, Al, this is a lot about your story as a pharmacist. So can you give us some background? How did you get here?
Sure. So I started off in community pharmacy. I spent probably about 16 years in community pharmacy, first as a pharmacist on a bench, and then moving into pharmacy recruitment, and then pharmacy regulatory affairs, where I spent the most of my career. And so I've been interacting with boards of pharmacy since probably about 2007, 2008. I then served on the Illinois State Board of Pharmacy and have been really engaged, or was really engaged with NABP throughout my career, throughout those years. And so, once the opportunity came up to take on this new challenge and this new role, I applied for it, and the executive committee chose me. So here I am. This is year 3 for me, and it's been great. But, I started right after COVID, so it's also been very interesting and fascinating in the same aspect.
Absolutely. And I think somebody at a meeting last week made a comment to me that I was like the one of the more tenured executives for a pharmacy association. And I had to sit there and think about it and be like, wait a minute, I've only been in this job for 5 years, but there has been a lot of turnover in those executive roles. But I think that's good. I mean, I think we have a new group sort of shepherding pharmacy and taking it forward. So it's exciting that you're there. And you had kind of a unique sort of transition because you replaced somebody that had been there for a very long time. I think Carmen, I don't know how long Carmen had been there, but it was quite some time.
Carmen had been with NABP for 35 years.
Yeah.
And so, it's he's a living legend, as they say it. And so, yes, I had the hard task of replacing him, and they're very big shoes to fill.
Well, I mean, you've done a great job, and it's exciting to be able to work with you on issues. And really, you've, at least in my mind, have opened up NABP. I'd never been to an NABP meeting before this year. And I think, the work that you do is sometimes not always reflected by the pharmacists out in practice. And there needs to be a better bridge to that, and they need to be more aware of the work that you do, not only from like our roles in associations, but from bench pharmacists that do what they do every day. It's important, and getting things done is important for them from that perspective.
I completely agree. I think being involved with your state board of pharmacy is key. Just understanding how the board of pharmacy works and the requirements and regulations and that whole process. Getting involved and getting active is vital to the survival of our profession.
One question I'll ask is, I know I've been a pharmacist for 20-something years. It used to be that the boards were all led by pharmacists, and more recently, the boards are led by fewer and fewer pharmacists. Can you talk about that and what impact that has?
Well, most boards are still led by majority pharmacists. What you're starting to see with boards is boards are starting to add a pharmacy technician member. And then most boards have either 1 or 2 public members as well. So it's still led by practicing pharmacists, but now they're diversifying the board a little bit more by bringing in a pharmacy technician, as pharmacy technicians' roles have stepped up. And then also there's always a public member, just to give a different perspective, and give that public voice.
Nice.
Al, let me ask you, give me a day in the life of Al Carter. What are the challenges that you're facing? What kind of keeps you up at night? Those type of things.
Oh gosh, that's Tom, I don't know if we have enough time on this podcast to go through a day in the life of me, but I'll try and do it justice. So first, it's interesting because, in a normal day, what we're doing is like if I look at this week, so we had a steering committee in to look at a uniform jurisprudence exam, which is made up of members from different boards of pharmacy, state boards of pharmacy, and then we also have members from the colleges of pharmacy and the CEO of AACP here. And that steering committee met for 2 days or a day and a half to talk about a uniform jurisprudence exam, the framework of what that'll look like, and what needs to be included in this exam, what needs to be required of states that would potentially utilize this exam, and what have you. After that, I had to come back to my office and respond to 3 reporters that are looking at the semaglutide and the Wegovy and Ozempic shortages, and compounding pharmacies doing that, and wanted they wanted some more information and feedback. But then I also had to respond to 2 customer complaints on pharmacies in specific boards in specific states. And we'll get these types of complaints all the time. And it's funny because they think that we, being the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, have regulatory authority. But right. That's exactly not the case. It's the exact opposite. NABP is here to support the boards of pharmacy. We provide them with tools and resources to allow them to continue to do their job and to focus on a vision of protecting public health. But the boards of pharmacy have independent authority, and we don't have any authority whatsoever. So it's always funny to get these complaints and these weird emails like, well, this pharmacist did this, and this pharmacy is doing this, and we need you to do something about it. And we're having to respond, well, you need to reach out to your state board of pharmacy, right, because they are the group that has the authority to take action.
Yeah, I'm sure you have some crazy stories that I don't know if you can share any of those with us, but even when just being there for a few years, I'm sure you've come across a couple crazy experiences that pharmacies or board of pharmacies have even maybe contacted you about or called you about. Could you share any of those with us?
Oh, I'm trying to think what would be a good story. You know what? I'll tell you a scary story. So we've had a couple instances, and this probably maybe 3 or 4 months ago, we had this individual call us and speak to our customer engagement group and was talking about how like he couldn't sign on to his computer and and he lived in a state of, I think it was Arizona or something like that, but that he was frustrated with the board and everybody, like he just went on like this political just like rampage and like at the end of it he was talking about like how he was going to go and shoot up whoever, and so we had to call the board and call law enforcement in the state of Arizona to flag this individual and to basically go check it out, because like we have to take those types of threats serious.
Oh yeah.
And it was like very scary, but it's like the craziness that we deal with. And I mean, I know I don't want to say everything is mental health or what have you, but as we look at what we're seeing with like opioid use disorders and addiction and mental health issues that have just gone undiagnosed or what have you, and pharmacists being able to step in and treat this, like we have so many opportunities within the profession to do so. And like just hearing different calls and different people sharing some positive, some negative, information, we can't take any of that lightly. And so we have to take very serious precautions and very strict precautions to make sure that, we are doing what we're saying and protecting public health, but also protecting our members.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Al, you talked a little bit about a unified jurisprudence exam. Talk a little bit about that. Do you foresee a day when a pharmacist, maybe they're not licensed nationally, but go through a process that is more a standard process for everybody in the United States versus what we do now, which is the NAPLEX and then a state jurisprudence exam? And then after that, maybe talk a little bit about what are the big priorities of NABP?
Sure. In regards to your first question around a uniform jurisprudence exam, I don't know if I don't know in my lifetime if we'll ever see something where it's accepted and utilized by all states. Some states have great processes in place and have been writing, the jurisprudence exam for many years, and it's the same people writing it, have a great exam, have great success with it, and have rules in place to require that. Whereas other states may not have the resources that are necessary to be able to write the jurisprudence exam and review their questions and everything else. And so those states may use that as an option. I would probably say, by the time I retire, that in the time that it's going to take to develop this type of exam, that we may see half the states, and that's just Al Carter speaking on a hypothetical guess there. But I'm not for sure. It's something that the membership wanted us to evaluate and examine and then move forward with the development, so that, for NABP, we provide tools, and as I mentioned, we provide tools and resources to the boards. Some boards need to use these tools and resources, other boards do not. And so, like, if you look at certain states, like California has their own jurisprudence exam, Arkansas has their own jurisprudence exam, and has a great process in implementing and utilizing their jurisprudence exam, and it's been working well for them. I wouldn't see, those states move into a uniform jurisprudence exam, because what they have is working for them. It's meeting the needs that the practice in their state. And as I mentioned earlier, every state is independent. So we deal with 54 independent jurisdictions as far as boards of pharmacy, and the tools and resources they need are different amongst each state. So, at the end of the day, maybe 2025, but that's, we're talking maybe 10 years down the road that I'd see that. But I could be wrong. I could be surprised. But I think it'll be a slow uptake at first, and then potentially additional states will come on later on, but we shall see. It's going to take a while to get there, because just to develop the exam is going to take is a very long process. And then in regards to your second question, as far as our initiatives, we've been really we made an announcement that we developed a platform called Pulse by NABP. And what Pulse is really focused on DSCSA, which is Drug Supply Chain Security Act, and the track and trace requirements that are going to be put in place for manufacturers, distributors, all the way down to the pharmacies. And so we've invested a lot of time and money into developing this platform for the boards of pharmacy, and then also for pharmacies to utilize. That's a big priority for us. One thing that NABP is also, since I've come on board, we've done a little different is we've gotten really into the advocacy and advocating for pharmacists. And so you think about the MAD Act and as I mentioned earlier, opioid use disorders and substance use disorders. We've done a lot of work with Congress to talk about pharmacists in this space and how pharmacists can help benefit the spread of treatment for those type of disorders. And so we will continue to advocate in that way, working with the DEA, working with SAMHSA, working with the FDA and the CDC on different types of needs for the general population that pharmacists can serve in that area, in that arena, and do justice for providing just quality patient care. Because you and I know, Chad, that not every patient is the same. Not every patient can drive to their pharmacy. You get into rural areas, or you get into these urban areas where individuals don't have cars or are living below the poverty line, and it takes them 3 modes of transportation to get 2 miles. And the access to pharmacy or to healthcare isn't the same as it is for maybe you and myself or others. And so how can we expand access of patient to a pharmacy, or just access of healthcare in general to all patients, and looking at different ways to do that. Digital health is going to be big moving forward. And so, we'll be focused on that. Our current president, Lenore Newsom, out of Arkansas, her presidential initiative is really focused on mental health and well-being. And so, we're going to be doing a lot in that space, in that arena, over this coming year to provide pharmacists and provide boards of pharmacies with tools to help with mental health, to help with well-being, and to just provide awareness, because there's a big stigma associated with mental health. There's a stigma associated with addiction. And so how do we remove those stigmas? How do we educate, healthcare professionals? How do we educate the public that pharmacists are there to help and reduce those barriers to that care? And so those are some of the things that we're working on. We'll continue to work on working conditions, the working environment for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians, workforce challenges that exist, and ways that we can remove some of those burdens, and just really talk about pharmacy and how pharmacy is key to healthcare, and how, there are amazing careers in pharmacy, and what can we do to educate the patient on what pharmacists do and the responsibilities of pharmacists. And so those are some of the big things that we're working on. We always have, some of our smaller items that are ongoing and have been ongoing for years. But if you want to talk about some of our big initiatives, it's definitely DSCSA and Pulse by NABP, but then mental health, well-being, working conditions. And one thing I didn't mention is bringing awareness to illicit and fake drugs. And so we have Safe.Pharmacy, which is a website that's free, that we go in and we have a team that just scours the internet looking for rogue internet pharmacies that are acting illegally. And we'll provide information on this website so that if a patient is going to go buy a drug online, they can come to this website first and make sure that the pharmacy that they're going to buy this drug from is legitimate and not acting illegally. And so we continue to work on that, continue with some public safety awareness campaigns to bring more attention to the Safe.Pharmacy so that we can provide that awareness and just educate the patient as well, so that we can keep them safe. And so those are our big buckets. I probably spoke, for
No, not at
I
all.
could speak for another 20 minutes on it, but yeah, that's what we're focused on.
And I appreciate those. First of all, from my perspective, I feel the change in NABP from the advocacy perspective. So I applaud you for that, because that's not something I was used to in my prior career, or when I first started at ASCP, was seeing NABP take more of an advocacy step. And I think that's great. And I also am thankful that you brought up that not everybody walks to the corner drugstore, because that's a big issue for our members. Is that we have residents in skilled nursing facilities, we have people that live in assisted living. Some of our members are correctional pharmacies, and one of the biggest issues that's starting to really have an impact on our sector, probably has had a bigger impact on correctional pharmacies for a long time, is the idea that access to methadone for drug addiction has not been something that we've been able to participate in, because if you think about it, you have to send somebody from the nursing home to the clinic to get their methadone every day, just like a person that lives in the community. And that's just not something that nursing homes can manage, and certainly not something that correctional facilities can manage, nor probably would they want to. So those populations have been sort of denied access to some of those treatments that we know are beneficial. And it's getting better, and they're writing rules for it right now, and I know you've been part of that, so thank you for that.
Sure, no problem.
Al, let me ask you, we've been talking a lot about getting provider status for pharmacists. We have a pharmacy in almost every town in America, and the availability of those pharmacists. I know that during the pandemic, we were able to do immunizations, and that was a big push. But, as we see the nursing shortage happen and get worse and worse, which is going to be an epidemic of its own someday, and primary care physician shortage is certainly happening. We're on the side that we need the government to approve provider status for, basic infections and things that pharmacies and pharmacists are trained to do now. What's your thoughts on that, and how would you like to see that develop?
I completely agree with you, Tom. I think that pharmacists need to be recognized for the service that they provide, and I think it's going to be challenging. I mean, this has been a fight, because There are others that are opposed to pharmacists getting, provider status because they look at it like a territory, like it's a turf war or something like that. I think what you're going to see, Tom, is I think you're going to start seeing more states start to recognize pharmacists as healthcare providers and do provider status with state programs before we start to see a federal. And this is again, just my personal opinion. I think it'll be in the states that have or where they're working with, some of these third-party payers and they're reimbursing pharmacists for some of the activities they're doing. They're seeing a lot of benefits. You're starting to see, you're starting to see that healthcare experience for the patient increase because of the access to pharmacists and pharmacists having the capability to do so much. Because as we know, not everyone has a primary care provider.
Right.
And as you mentioned, with the shortage of physicians and the shortages of nurses, it's going to be very difficult for everyone to have a primary care provider. But everyone knows their local pharmacist, and everyone goes to their local pharmacist for all of their questions, healthcare questions, before they reach out to a doctor or anyone else. And so once once more start to recognize what pharmacists have the capability to do, instead of just recognizing pharmacists during emergencies to help them get out of, whatever jam that they're in, I think you're going to start seeing that from the federal side. But I think we're going to see more states do it than we will, from provider status from Medicare.
Al, do you think that's when I think of what you said earlier about mental health and workforce, obviously pharmacists can play a role in helping people address mental health issues, patients, but there's also their own mental health that we worry about. And I feel like the provider status, whether you call it that or it's payment for clinical services or non-dispensing services, is an answer to really both of those issues for pharmacists. It improves their mental health because I think they would prefer to spend more time doing those activities. And then it also makes it more appealing from a job perspective, and it helps the workforce issue. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it is. The only other concern, because, pharmacists are dealing with shortages in certain settings as well. And if you look at the current enrollment in pharmacy schools, there's been a significant decrease in enrollment numbers. And so like in the next 3 years, or probably 3 years from now, when, there's a lower number of graduates, it could be a dire situation for pharmacists. And so what we as a profession have to do is we have to start recognizing pharmacy technicians for services that they can provide, so that they can do more of those operational administrative roles, so that pharmacists can focus on that clinical aspect. And then I think, with that, you'll have the capability to provide those clinical services as a pharmacist. But we also have to keep in mind that when we get provider status, we need to make sure that we can't do it by ourselves, and we need to make sure that we have the recognition and the correct authority for pharmacy technicians to do some of those more operational and administrative duties as well, and pay them for it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, and I think it's a very, very good point. I mean, everybody knows that the heartbeat of a pharmacy is really the certified technicians that really make it run on a day-to-day basis. And we've seen here through COVID that there be labor shortages. It's very, very difficult to get a trained certified technician, a good certified technician. And we've seen salaries due to inflation, the economy go up and up and up. And so one of the biggest complaints I get across the nation from my friends in pharmacy is it's just hard to find good people. And even when we find good people, if they're great hard workers, they're going to get opportunities elsewhere. How do you see that alleviating, or being able to alleviate, or do you think that we need to do something different, approach it differently?
Yeah, I think there's two things that we have to do. I think one, we have to pay pharmacy technicians, and it's going to be challenged with the current reimbursement model that's in place. And so we have to figure out a way of how to promote pharmacy technicians as a career. And I know, there are organizations that are doing just that with PTCB, and others. But we have to figure out a way of how do we promote pharmacy technicians and how do we promote this as a career choice and a career field. And some states are doing great. I know New Hampshire has this like certified or advanced certified pharmacy technician where they can do a lot of things that the pharmacist can currently do with, outside of those clinical judgment activities. You're starting to see other states that are moving in that direction as well. Arkansas is doing a lot with pharmacy technicians. Idaho's been doing a lot with pharmacy technicians, allowing them to do more services. And you also see what COVID has done. Before COVID, I think there were like 5 or 6 states that allowed pharmacy technicians to administer vaccines. And after COVID, for a while with the PrEP Act, every state had the capability to do that. And then afterwards, there were many states that moved in a direction of making it permanent so that pharmacy technicians can do that. I think that's moving those in the right direction. But I think we as a profession have to promote pharmacy technicians as well, and because we all know that when practicing in a pharmacy, you're only as good as your best tech. And if your best tech goes down, like, it's a struggle for every pharmacist. And so how do we continue to promote those pharmacy technicians, but how do we make it a career for them and make sure they see that there is a great career as a pharmacy technician?
Yeah, I love that.
That's awesome. Well, Al, how about a parting shot? Not to put you on the spot, but what message would you give to pharmacists out there from your position, from NABP's position? What's your parting shot to pharmacists?
There are 2 things I would say to pharmacists. One is, as a profession, pharmacists, we have to educate patients on what pharmacists do. We need to do it nationally. We need to do it in the states. We need to do it personally. And so we need to make sure that patients know what pharmacists do and why it's so important. Our roles are so important, what we do. Second, and actually I'm gonna do 3. So there's 3. Second is your board of pharmacy is your friend. A lot of people, and even when I was going through practice, like, oh gosh, board of pharmacy is coming in. I was like, I do not want to deal with this. I'm scared.
It's the principal's office.
It is. But boards of pharmacies are there to help protect public health. And part of that is protecting the environment that we practice in. And so if there's ever concern, make sure you reach out to your board of pharmacy. Don't be afraid of them. And third, and Chad, you know this best because we've been talking about it since COVID, is collaboration is key. We're never going to get where we need to be going at it on our own. We have got to do it together.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Al. I appreciate it. You're an awesome guest, and appreciate what you're doing and all you're bringing to NABP and really making it more of a transparent process and organization for pharmacy.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Tom. And I have to say, like, that Top Gun quote at the beginning, I'm a huge Top Gun fan, so I'm going to have to steal that from you, Chad.
Yeah, that's good. I love it. All right.
Thank you, Al. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
What NABP does for us.
Thank you both. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Tom.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next Our Experience podcast.